The sheriff tied her wrists and dragged her like an animal until a gunslinger shouted, "Let her go. She's my wife." The wind whipped through Dustwell, as if the desert itself had a bone to pick with the town. Loose shutters slammed against, weathered wood and sand crept under every door. It was the kind of evening that made even the dogs stay quiet. But the silence broke when the sheriff's voice rang through the center of town. "You know the law?" He dragged her by the wrists. Rope tied tight down the main road of Dustwell. Her dress, torn and dust-stained, dragged behind her.
Ow.
The townsfolk didn't move. They watched. Some from their porches, others from behind curtained windows. Not one soul dared intervene. The woman's name was Clara. She didn't scream. Her lips were cracked, but tight. Her chin held high, even as her knees scraped the gravel. The sheriff, Thomas Clay, had once been respected in Dustwell. That was before he turned bitter, before he lost his son in the northern skirmishes. Now he enforced the law with fury instead of justice. "What's the charge, Sheriff?" Someone dared to mutter from the shadows of the saloon. He didn't answer. He only yanked Clara harder, pulling her through the center of the street as if trying to erase her with every step. Old Man Gibbons whispered to no one in particular, "She didn't do nothin'. That girl nursed my wife till her last breath. Sheriff's just mad she won't marry him." The whispers rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. Then came the hooves. Slow at first, distant, a hollow echo on the canyon trail. The sheriff paused for a breath. Clara opened her eyes. From behind a shimmer of desert heat, a lone rider appeared. Black coat, broad hat, rifle slung across his back. He didn't gallop. He didn't shout. He simply rode into Dustwell as if he'd been expected. The stranger dismounted just outside the sheriff's office. Every eye turned. He looked right at Clara, and then, in a voice calm as dusk, he said, "Let her go. She's my wife." Gasps rippled. Through the crowd, Sheriff Clay turned slowly, his face pale beneath his sweat. Clara's eyes filled, not with tears, but with fire. The dust had stopped. But now, Dustwell was about to burn. Sheriff Clay's hand hovered near his holster. The rope around Clara's wrists still tugged tight, but all his attention was locked on the man standing before him. The gunslinger wasn't tall by legend's standards, but he carried himself like a storm in a whiskey bottle, quiet, dark, and ready to explode. His boots were coated in red trail dust. A faint scar ran from his left cheekbone to the edge of his jaw. He hadn't blinked once. Clay spat in the dirt. "Ain't no marriage records with her name on 'em. Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer. He stepped closer instead. "I said, name's Eli Cade." His voice was low, as if it had been scraped across years of gunpowder and grief. "And she's been my wife since before your badge meant anything." Clara blinked. Her expression didn't give it away, but her heart slammed against her chest. Eli Cade. She hadn't heard that name in 5 years. Not since the border wars. Not since the fire in Cold Rock. "You're lying," Clay said. Near his gun, Eli didn't flinch. "Try drawing. Let's see if your aim's faster than my truth." The silence that followed was deeper than any the town had heard in years. It wrapped around the crowd like a noose. Clay's fingers twitched once more, then dropped from his holster. He barked, "Cut her loose." Deputy Harlan, who'd been watching nervously from the edge, stepped forward and sliced the rope with a trembling knife. Clara rubbed her wrists, her skin raw. She didn't look at Eli. Not yet. Eli turned to the crowd. "Any of you saw what happened today, you'll remember it. Not for what the sheriff did, but for who didn't stop him. That hit harder than any bullet, heads lowered, eyes averted." Without another word, Eli turned and walked toward the old church at the edge of town. Clara followed him, her steps uneven but defiant. Behind them, Clay's jaw tightened. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. From behind a barrel. A figure in a gray duster watched the whole thing. Quiet, calculating, and packing more than one gun. The church was quiet. Just like Eli remembered. Time hadn't touched it. The wooden beams still. Bowed from age, the cross crooked on top, the bell long rusted silent. Inside, Stained glass windows cast broken colors across dust-covered pews. Clara stepped in behind him. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Not at first. "You picked a hell of a time to show up," she said finally, her voice low. "You looked like you needed saving. I looked like I needed justice. There's a difference." Eli turned slowly. "You still wear the ring?" She hesitated, then pulled a small chain from under her blouse. A gold band hung from it, tarnished but whole. "You didn't come back," she said. "Not when the fire came. Not when I buried Mama. Not when the doctor said I might not walk. Again, I couldn't," he replied. "You know why?" She laughed bitterly. "Do I?" He stepped forward, gently taking her hand. "Clara, I was captured. 5 years in a Union prison camp. They told me you were dead." The color drained from her face. "Who told you that?" "Someone with Clay's badge." Outside, boots crunched the gravel. Eli's hand went to his sidearm. A young boy burst through the door, no older than 12. Freckles, sunburnt face, and panic in his eyes. "Mr. Cade, they're coming. Sheriff's gatherin', the marshals. Said you ain't talkin' no woman from his town." Clara looked at Eli. "You should leave." "I didn't ride all this way to turn back." "Not again." From the edge of town, the bell above the general store rang 3 times the signal, kind Dustwell hadn't heard since the war. Clara gripped the pew. "He means to kill you, Eli." "Why?" Checked his revolver, every motion smooth and quiet. "Then he better not miss." Outside, dust was rising. It wasn't the wind. Eli stepped out of the chapel. Like a man walking into a funeral he knew was his own, the sky had dimmed. Dust hung thick in the air, turning the light amber and eerie. The streets of Dustwell weren't empty anymore. Men with rifles leaned against porch rails. Others stood atop buildings, shadows behind barrels. And in the center, like a spider in its web, stood Sheriff Clay. Clara stayed behind the church door, peeking just enough to see, but not enough to be seen. Clay's voice rang out, steady and smug. "Town law says any man claiming a woman under false pretense is a fraud. Fraud gets 1 warning, ... and 1 bullet." Eli didn't blink. "What if it ain't false?" Clay's smile twitched. "And maybe she tells us. Right here, right now." "Turn to the chapel, Clara. Step out now and tell these people this ain't your husband. I'll let him walk." Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than a scream. Clay's voice got sharper. "You're protecting a liar, girl. And for what? He left you. He burned you. Hell, he's nothin' but a name from your nightmares." The door creaked open. Clara stepped out. Her dress fluttered slightly in the wind. She held her chin high. "I never saw his body," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "They told me he died. But I never saw his body, and I never took off his ring." The townsfolk shifted, some exchanged glances. Others lowered their weapons slightly. "I remember what a lie feels like," Clara added. "And Sheriff, everything out of your mouth tastes like one." A murmur passed through the crowd. Clay's face darkened. "That's so?" Eli stepped forward. "You've got 6 men with you, maybe more. But you know what makes us different, Clay?" Clay didn't respond. "I came here alone," Clay scoffed. "So what?" Eli's smile was razor thin. "Means I'm not afraid to die." Clay raised his hand. Fire. But the first bullet didn't come from the rooftops. It came from the bell tower. A crack echoed, and one of Clay's riflemen dropped, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Panic burst across the street. Clara turned sharply. Eli didn't answer. His pistol was out before the second shot rang. Fired. Once dead center at Clay's feet, forcing him back. "Somebody's watching your back," Clara whispered. Eli didn't reply. But deep in the shadows of the bell tower, a figure crouched, the same one who had watched from behind the barrel earlier. Coat gray, rifle long, patience longer. Someone was playing a longer game than Clay ever imagined, and Dustwell just ran out of rules. The dust had barely settled when the streets of Dustwell erupted into chaos. Eli moved fast, too fast for a man just off the trail. He ducked behind the water trough, reloaded without looking. 2 more shots rang out from the bell tower. One precise, controlled. That mystery shooter wasn't just covering Eli, they were steering the fight. Clay's men panicked. Few dropped their guns. One leapt behind a wagon. Another stumbled into the blacksmith's barn, cursing and bleeding. Clara pressed herself behind the chapel doorframe, her breath ragged. She wasn't a stranger to violence, not anymore. But this wasn't just gunfire. This was war. And at the center of it stood the man she once loved, the man she might still love, but didn't trust. Not yet. Sheriff Clay retreated toward the saloon, yelling orders no one followed. His men weren't soldiers, they were hired cowards. Good at threatening shopkeepers, not facing real bullets. Get the damn dynamite. He bellowed, light the bell tower up. But someone else was already moving. From the alley behind the general store, the gray-coated figure emerged. Tall, lean, and walking with the calm of a preacher on Sunday. No one fired, no one moved. He didn't even raise a weapon. Just walked straight toward the chaos like it owed him money. Eli saw him. And for the first time since arriving, his eyes narrowed with recognition. No. He muttered, it can't be. The figure stopped beside a horse trough, tipped. His hat and locked eyes with Eli. You're still slow on the draw, Cade, the man said, voice smooth as riverstone. But I reckon you never missed. Clara peeked out. Who is that? Eli wiped blood from a scratch on his cheek. His name's Silas Granger, the bounty hunter. Eli nodded. The ghost of the frontier. And then it made sense. The clean shots, the silent watchfulness. The fact that Eli didn't draw when Silas appeared, only stared like he'd seen a piece of his own past crawl out of the ground. Silas raised both hands. I ain't here to kill nobody, Sheriff. Just came to settle a score. Clay's voice. Cracked behind a barrel? You working with him? Silas smiled. I don't work with anybody. But I don't like women getting dragged through dirt for saying no. Turned to Clara. Ma'am? Clara gave a slow nod, her mind racing. Eli stood now, side by side with Silas. For a moment, Dustwell held its breath. Sheriff, Silas said, you've got 2 choices. Walk away from this, or be buried by it. Sheriff Clay's eyes darted from the rooftops, to the townsfolk now watching openly, to the woman he thought he could crush, and the 2 men who had come back from the dead to stop him. You think I'll just leave? He growled. Eli cocked his revolver. I think you'll lose. And this time no one stood by his side. For the first time in years, Sheriff Clay didn't have the louder voice in Dustwell. He stepped back. His boots crunching over shattered glass. His badge glinted under the low afternoon sun, but no one saluted it now, not even the men he paid. Clara could feel it, the weight shifting, not because Eli had returned. Not because Silas Granger had emerged from the shadows like some myth. No. It was because the people of Dustwell were finally watching, and they didn't like what they saw in Clay anymore. Eli lowered his revolver slightly, but his eyes never left Clay's. What's it gonna be? Clay's lips curled. This ain't over, no, Silas replied. It's just starting. With a bitter sneer, Clay turned and shoved through the saloon doors. Inside, a few loyal brutes scrambled to follow, but most stayed where they were, unsure, scared, or maybe just tired of being on the wrong side of the gun. The square held its breath a moment longer. Then silence reclaimed the town. Clara exhaled like she hadn't in 10 years. Eli walked slowly toward her, his boots thudding softly against the wooden walk. The townsfolk parted like water. No one dared stop him. She didn't speak when he stopped. In front of her, he looked older, scarred, tired. But his eyes, they were the same. 10 years, Clara whispered. Not a word, not a letter. I thought you were safer without me. It's not your choice to make. Eli nodded, jaw tight. You're right. And behind them, Silas leaned against a porch post, chewing a matchstick, watching, waiting, like he always did. Clara crossed her arms, and him. Why's he here? Eli glanced back at Silas. Because Dustwell's dirtier than it looks. and he knows where the rot begins. Silas pushed off the post. That sheriff's working with a land syndicate out of St. Louis. Rail money. Mines. They're buying ranches by force. Clara's was next. Clara's eyes widened. My ranch? They weren't after your heart, darlin', Silas said. Just your land rights. Eli clenched his fists. That's why they dragged your name through the mud. Why they let Clay run wild. You were in the way. Clara staggered back a step. All this wasn't about me at all. Eli stepped. Closer? No, but I am. That hit her harder than any bullet. She looked away. I can't fix the past, Clara, he said. But I didn't come to Dustwell to stir ghosts. Came to bury him. Silas tossed the matchstick aside. Then we'd better start digging. That sheriff ain't running. He's regrouping. The three of them stood there in the dusty afternoon light, a widow with land, a ghost from her past, and a hunter who never missed. Behind them, a child peeked from a window. Beside him, a woman held her breath. The whole town was listening now, and they knew Dustwell was about to choose who really ran it. Not by law, but by fire. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the wooden walls of Dustwell in blood-orange hues. Shadows grew long and sharp across the square, and for the first time in a long time, the town looked like a place where truth might finally breathe. Clara stood on the church steps, eyes locked on the distance. You said the syndicate's after? My land, she said to Silas. What proof do you have? Silas pulled a folded telegram from his coat. Got this from a rail agent in Fort Laramie. Same syndicate tried buying out 2 ranches near Red Hook. Both burned to the ground a week later. Survivors vanished. Clay's name came up more than once in their ledgers. He's their dog. He barks when they say bark. Clara took the telegram with a trembling hand. Her land, her father's land. The last thing she had left of him, and they were trying to erase it like a footprint in. Sandot Eli stepped beside her. They wanted me dead too. That's why I stayed gone. It wasn't just prison. Someone paid to keep me quiet. Clara turned sharply. You were alive all this time and never wrote. Not even once. I thought if they knew I was alive. Never be safe. Her voice cracked. Let me mourn you, Eli. You'll let me become something hard just to survive. He reached into his coat and pulled something out. Worn, bent, wrapped in OILCL. OTH. He placed it in her hands. It was a photograph of them, before the war, before the silence. Her hair in ribbons, his eyes bright. Both laughing. I carried this in my boot every day, he said quietly. Only thing that kept me from forgetting what my name meant. Clara's fingers tightened on the photo. She wanted to scream, to forgive him, to run, all at once. But Dustwell didn't allow the luxury of processing pain, not when the enemy was loading their rifles again. A sound snapped them back. Hooves. Dozens of them. From the ridge just beyond the hills came a cloud of dust and silhouettes. Not bandits, riders, real ones. Silas stepped forward, squinting. Rail syndicate. Enforcers, Pinkertons, maybe worse. Eli's grip went to his gun. Clara whispered, We can't fight them all. No, Silas said. But we don't have. 2. He looked around the square. At the shop owners, the blacksmith, the barkeep, the families peeking from windows. Dustwell had been ruled by fear for years. But today, it had seen something different. Courage. Clara raised her voice. They're not just coming for me, they're coming for all of you. You think once they take my ranch, they'll stop there? They'll rename this town before you can write it on a signpost. Silence. Then an old man stepped forward.
Is
Barber, his hands shaky, but his eyes burning. I got one good shot left in me. Then the general store clerk. I'll stand. A woman clutching a baby nodded. I'll bring water, bandages. And one by one, they stood. Not as gunmen as a town. Silas smiled. Well, looks like we ain't alone. Eli cocked his revolver. Then let's give 'em hell. From the ridge, the riders broke into a charge, and Dustwell stood ready. The riders stormed toward Dustwell like a dust storm of leather and metal, black coats, rifles slung high, faces cold and hidden behind scarves. They weren't here to talk. They were here to wipe the map clean. Clara stood at the center of the square, her hands trembling, but not from fear anymore, from fury. From purpose, Eli took position on the saloon balcony, rifle steady. Silas moved like a ghost from rooftop to rooftop, silent, invisible, deadly. Down below, townsfolk braced themselves. Pitchforks, hunting rifles, old muskets, even kitchen knives. It didn't matter. They weren't soldiers. They were defending. Home. The lead rider cracked his whip. This town belongs to the Eastern Land Syndicate now. Stand down, and no one dies. Silence. Then Clara stepped forward. You want my land? You'll have to bury me on it. A single shot rang out, not from the riders, from the chapel tower. A bullet clipped the syndicate man's hat clean. Off. Silas. The warning was loud and clear. The riders opened fire. Dustwell roared back. The square lit up in gunfire and grit. Glass shattered, horses screamed, smoke curled above the rooftops. But through it all, something remarkable happened. The people of Dustwell didn't run. They stood. Even the banker fired a rusted pistol from his window. The blacksmith swung a hammer into the jaw of a rider who made it too close. Clara ducked behind a wagon, firing carefully. She'd never taken a life before, but her aim was steady. And when one of the riders fell, she didn't flinch. Eli shouted from the balcony, "They're circling left." Silas dropped two more from the rooftop like a shadow with a heartbeat, calm, calculated. But the riders kept coming, Clara's. Ears rang from the noise, her fingers were slick with sweat. She saw the general store's windows blow open as one rider tossed in a firebomb, and the shelves caught flame instantly. Water. She screamed, "We need water." From behind, the two children ran with buckets. The older one, barely 13, tossed it into the blaze while smoke clawed at his face. Then came the worst sound Clara had ever heard. A scream. Eli. She turned sharply. He'd been hit. A shoulder shot. Blood bloomed down his sleeve as he dropped behind the balcony railing. "Eli," she cried. But before she could move, two riders charged her from opposite sides. She froze. Then bang, bang. Both men dropped, shots clean through their backs. Clara turned. Sheriff Clay stood at the edge of the square, revolver still smoking. His face was pale, torn, angry. But he wasn't pointing his gun at her. Not today. You think I'd let outsiders take what I spent years building? He snarled. This is still my town, Silas, still above, shouted, then help us save it. Clay's jaw clenched. Then he turned and began firing into the syndicate ranks with the kind of precision only a born killer knew. It was the strangest alliance Dustwell had ever seen. The outlaw, the hunter, the widow, the sheriff, all fighting for one broken, stubborn patch of dirt, a town that finally decided enough was enough. As the smoke thickened and the gunfire began to fade, one thing became clear. This wasn't over, but Dustwell would never be the same. When the gunfire finally stopped, Dustwell was no longer quiet, it was haunted. Smoke drifted low like ghosts across the square. The saloon roof had half collapsed, the general store burned. Slow and blue, horses stood panicked, bleeding or riderless. And the smell, burning wood, sweat, gunpowder, and blood settled into everyone's lungs like a second skin. Clara dropped to her knees beside Eli. "Don't you dare die," she whispered, voice thick. Eli grunted, pressing his hand to the bleeding wound on his shoulder. "Didn't ride 10 years to drop dead in a square, Clara." She tore fabric from her dress and pressed it tight against his shoulder. "You're lucky I know how to stitch. You're lucky I still know how to bleed slow." Even now, he joked, that same damn smirk under pain broke her heart all over again. Sheriff Clay staggered over, reloading as he walked, face grim and coated in dust. "You got wounded?" he asked Eli. "I've had worse hangovers." Clay scoffed, then looked at Clara. "I ain't apologizing," he said flatly. But I didn't shoot you when I could have. That counts for something. Clara stood slowly, wiping her hands. You're right, she said, eyes ice cold. It counts for barely enough to keep breathing. Silas stepped down from the roof, rifle on his back, face unreadable. They'll send more, he said. That wasn't the whole syndicate. Just a warning. We didn't flinch, Clara said. Silas nodded. No, he didn't. Which means now they'll send something worse. Eli groaned. Wonderful. Anyone got a plan that doesn't end in bullets? No one answered. The townsfolk emerged from hiding, faces bloodied, arms bandaged, children wrapped in their mothers' skirts. Dustwell looked like a ghost town, but in their eyes, fire still burned. The barber who could barely stand held up a broken shotgun. We held him off. Clara turned to the crowd, voice loud enough to carry. This wasn't a win, yet, but it was a start. She looked down at the earth, still stained where Eli had fallen. They want us afraid, quiet, willing to sell our names and land for pennies. She looked up, tears shining. But today, we made them bleed for it. A murmur spread, the kind that wasn't just agreement, it was awakening. Then an old woman stepped forward, dragging a chest from her sewing shop. She opened it to reveal letters, dozens of them, maps, bank receipts, contracts. Clara's eyes widened. What is this? Evidence, the woman said. I worked Clay's books before he threw me out. I kept copies. Hid him. Told myself I'd burn him one day. But today, I saw what you were fighting for. I want to fight too. Silas stepped forward, eyes sharp. This is everything. Rail syndicate signatures. Clay's personal payouts. Orders to seize Dustwell properties, Clara whispered. We take this to the federal judge. Eli chuckled weakly, and hope he ain't on their payroll too. Silas smiled. Then we find one who isn't. Somewhere out there the law still has teeth. Clara clutched the papers to her chest. Then let's sharpen them. 3 days. Past the dust hadn't settled. Not really. Every footstep in Dustwell still crunched over bullet shells, and the saloon served more bandages than beer. But something had changed. The people had stopped whispering. Clara sat in her father's old office at the ranch, now cluttered with documents, maps, and receipts from the sewing shop chest. Across from her, Silas paced like a caged wolf. This, he said, tapping the table, is enough to burn down the entire syndicate. Only if we get it into the right hands, Clara replied. Sorting through each page with meticulous care, Eli sat nearby, his arm in a sling, eyes sharp despite the bruises. We'll need a clean rider, someone with no ties to Dustwell. They catch a local carrying this. It's over. Clara looked up. Then I'll go. No, Eli said firmly. They'll expect you. Silas stopped pacing. I'll do it. You. Clara raised a brow. You don't trust me? He said, which makes me the perfect mule. They won't expect me to do something honest. She hesitated, then nodded. Fort Bismarck's federal circuit judge is the only one we can gamble on. His brother was run off his ranch by the same syndicate. He might listen. Then I ride. At first light, Silas said, that night Dustwell was quiet. Too quiet. Eli couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch of Clara's ranch, watching the moonlight brush across the desert. His shoulder ached, but something else kept him awake. Guilt. Memories. Choices he couldn't unmake. Clara joined him, wrapped in a shawl. Can't sleep? She asked softly. Not since I got back. She leaned beside him. You know, I hated you for a long time. I deserved that. But part of me always knew. If you were alive, you had your reasons. Eli looked at her, eyes glassy. I wanted to come home every day. I just thought staying away meant you'd be safe. That I'd be less of a danger from a distance. Clara's voice cracked. You fool. You were my home. Silence. Then the distant thud of hooves. Fast. Urgent Clara and Eli turned sharply as a young rider galloped in from the east trail. Horse foaming at the mouth. Marshall's coming. He shouted, Not Clay, real marshals. From the capital. Clara stepped forward. How many? 6. And they're not here for tea. Eli's stomach dropped. The syndicate's already trying to clean house. I think we've sent the papers. They're going to burn the rest of the town down just to erase the trail, Clara said. And then she whispered Silas. Hadn't even left yet. If they caught him with the documents, they'd hang him before he reached the county line. Without thinking, Clara turned, sprinting into the barn. Eli called after her. What are you doing? Not letting another man I care about ride into a bullet alone. She saddled up in under a minute. No time for fear, no time for sleep. Only one thing mattered now, getting Silas out alive, and keeping the truth breathing long enough to burn the devil down. Clara's horse thundered down the canyon trail, hooves pounding like war drums across the cracked earth. She didn't stop for water, didn't blink against the wind. The moon hung high, cold and watching as if it too held its breath. Up ahead, a flicker of campfire, barely there, like a heartbeat. She yanked the reins, dismounted, and ran the last few steps on foot, boots kicking up dry dirt. Silas. She hissed into the night. A figure stood fast, rifle rising, then lowering. You followed me? They're coming, Clara gasped. The Capitol Marshals, syndicate sending them to clean up. You can't go that way. They'll catch you before sunrise. Silas cursed under his breath. I was taking the trade route, less watched, more snakes. You'll need another path. I've ridden every canyon within 50 miles, he said, and every one of them belongs to someone or something dangerous. Clara stepped. Closer, then let's make a new one. Silas stared at her, then slowly, his expression shifted. Respect, maybe even trust. Mount up. They rode together, side by side, cutting diagonally through the narrowest part of Red Hollow, a place most riders avoided after nightfall. Steep cliffs, loose rocks, rumors of bandits and worse, but they had no time for fear. Clara clutched the saddle, ducked low as branches clawed at her face. She'd never ridden this fast, this wild, but her pulse matched every hoofbeat. Why are you helping me? Silas finally shouted over the wind. Because I believe in you now, she yelled back. And maybe because I want to believe. Can still be brave again. Silas gave a short laugh, bitter and breathless. You already are. Then a shot had echoed through the canyon like a whip crack. Clara jerked the reins. Behind us? Silas turned in the saddle. 3 riders. Black coats, no badges. They're not marshals, he growled. They're enforcers. Hired guns. Paid to kill and disappear the evidence. The papers and them split left, he shouted. Clara veered down a rock slope, hooves skidding. Dust choked her lungs. The horses kicked stones off the edge, sending them tumbling into black ravines below. Another. Shot this time closer. Silas fired back once, twice, forcing one pursuer to pull back. Keep going, he barked suddenly. Clara's horse reared, hit by a stray bullet that nicked its haunch. She flew from the saddle, hitting the dirt hard. Everything spun. Before she could move, a rider was on her. He jumped down, revolver-drawn mask over his face, eyes like rusted nails. Give me the bag, he snarled. The satchel with the papers had fallen just out of reach. Clara's fingers stretched, but then crack. The gunman stiffened, then dropped, hole in his chest. Silas stood 10 feet away, rifle still aimed. He rushed over, yanked Clara to her feet. We have to go now. I have the bag, she said, clutching it to her chest. They climbed back onto Silas's horse together, one saddle. 2 fugitives and a secret the syndicate would kill the whole county to erase. Behind them the canyon kept echoing with hoofbeats. But ahead, only darkness and the desperate hope that somewhere, past the dust and death, justice still lived by the time the sun began to rise over the ragged cliffs of the Arizona basin. Clara and Silas had put 10 miles between them and the bodies in. The canyon, the desert, was quiet, too quiet. They finally stopped beneath an overhang, jagged rock shelf that offered just enough shade and seclusion. Clara slid off the horse, her knees buckling. Silas caught her. You all right? I've had worse, she lied. Truth was, her ribs ached. Her face was streaked with blood and grit, and inside her heart thudded like it didn't know how to stop. She slumped to the ground, clutching the show. The documents were still safe. Still dry? But for how long? Silas knelt beside her, digging into his saddlebag. He pulled out a canteen, held it to her lips. Slow, the water was warm, but it tasted like life. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't reply at first, then. "I should have left a long time ago." Clara frowned. "Why didn't you?" He stared out across the rising sun. "Because you're the first person in 10 years who looked at me like I could be something else." Her chest tightened. "I never hated you, Silas. Not really. I hated myself enough for both of us," he said softly. They sat in silence. A long while. The horse chewed at dry brush. Wind kicked up sand. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed over the cliffs. "I used to dream about this," Clara finally said. "Being hunted." "No." She looked at him, doing something that mattered. Running not from something, but toward something. A better ending. Silas looked down. "You're brave." She smiled bitterly. "I'm desperate." He shook his head. "What courage looks like in real life." Clara's hand rested on the satchel. "We're close," she said. "2 more ridges, and we'll hit Carson's Fork. From there, we can take the back road to Bismarck." Silas nodded. "Then we ride at dusk." Clara turned to him. "Why wait?" "Because riding in daylight means getting spotted. Because I think we both need to know what we're about to walk into." She hesitated. "And what's that?" "A war," Silas said. "Between people who sell power and those who still remember what it feels like to have none." Clara's grip tightened on the bag. "That judge, you think he'll listen?" "If he doesn't," Silas said, "then we make sure someone else does. The press. The people. Hell, I'll shout it in the church square if I have to." Clara chuckled. "You in a church?" "Miracles happen," he said. Then he turned serious. "But we've only got one shot. If this goes sideways, you and I vanish."
Ow.
"No graves, no names." Clara met his gaze. "Then let's make it count." The rock's gold. Clara leaned her head against the saddle, exhausted, but alive. And for the first time in a long time, not alone, far off below the bluff, a lone rider watched through binoculars. No badge, no horse brand. Just a pale scar across his jaw, and a grin that said he liked what he saw. He turned and rode off, quiet as a ghost, toward Dustwell, because the town wasn't done bleeding yet. The town of Dustwell rose in the distance like a mirage, wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. The steeple of the old chapel cracked, but still reaching skyward, like a bony finger. Clara could see it from the ridge. They'd made it. Almost Silas slowed the horse, eyeing the town through a rusted spyglass. "Too quiet," he muttered. "Maybe it's still asleep, or maybe they're waiting for us." They dismounted and led the horse behind. A cluster of dry shrubs. Silas knelt, unbuckled his rifle. His fingers moved on muscle memory, checking bullets. Tightening the strap around his wrist, Clara touched his shoulder. "If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does," she whispered, "I want you to take the papers and disappear. Don't be a martyr." Silas looked at her, his eyes suddenly softer than she'd ever seen them. "I've disappeared enough in my life. This time, I stay." Lump rose in her throat. They made their way through a dry creek bed that led into the back edge of town, sticking to shadows. The saloon's doors swung in the breeze. A dog barked once and went silent. Then they saw him. Sheriff Mallory, alive, standing. Tall outside the courthouse, wearing his star like nothing ever happened. Clara froze. "That's not possible." Silas's jaw clenched. "I saw him shot. Dead." Mallory's voice rang out. "Afternoon, folks." "Been expecting you?" Guards stepped out from alleyways, rifles cocked. Syndicate men in Dustwell deputy uniforms. Clara's blood ran cold. "It's a trap," she whispered. "No," said Silas. "It's worse. It's theater." Mallory stepped forward, arms open like a preacher on Sunday. "Now don't go actin' surprised. You think the syndicate let me bleed? Out without mackin' use of it. Whole town saw me fall. Thought I died a hero. But here I am, still serving the cause. Clara reached into her satchel slowly. If you take one more step, Mallory said, my men shoot. If you hand that bag to anyone else, they'll shoot em too. Silas raised both hands. I thought you believed in justice, Sheriff. I believe in control, Mallory sneered. Dustwell don't run on truth. It runs on silence. A figure emerged from the courthouse. Clara's heart almost stopped. It was Judge Harland, but he wasn't in chains, wasn't afraid. He was laughing. You thought I was the whistleblower, Clara whispered. But you were part of it. Harland gave her a slow nod. You were useful, Miss Clara. Your father's old case file, very moving, but exposing it, so that was never in the cards. Silas stepped between them. You're going to regret this. Harland chuckled. Sounds like something a dying man says. Mallory whistled once. The guards raised their rifles, but before a single shot was fired. Boom. The back of the saloon exploded outward in fire and splinters. Smoke roared across the square. People screamed, and out of the chaos rode a lone figure. On a blood-red stallion, face masked, coat black as midnight, 2 pistols in hand. And he was shooting like the devil himself. Silas grabbed Clara's hand. Run. Gunfire cracked like lightning. The masked rider's stallion reared as he fired left. Then right, each shot landing clean, knocking 2 guards down into the dust. Clara ducked behind a barrel, heart thundering. Smoke stung her eyes. Silas pulled her low, shielding her with his body as splinters rained down from the broken saloon walls. That rider, she gasped. I don't know who he is. Silas muttered, reloading. But I love him already. The rider flipped from his horse mid-gallop, rolled through the dirt, and came up behind a water trough. His coat flared like wings. Another shot, Mallory's hat went flying. Move. Silas shouted, dragging Clara. Toward the side alley, bullets whizzed past. Guards shouted. But most were already scrambling, unsure who to fire at. The masked rider moved like a ghost, swift and fearless. Then he looked at Clara. Even through the mask, she saw it. The recognition. He nodded once, then reached into his saddlebag and tossed something through the air. It landed at her feet with a thunk, a leather ledger, wrapped in red string. What is this? She cried. Back up, Silas said. He has documents. Clara grabbed it, flipped it open. Names, bank numbers, transfers, every official tied to the syndicate, including Harland and Mallory. It was everything. Silas's jaw dropped. This changes the game. But who? Clara looked up. The masked rider had leaped back onto his horse. He fired one last shot, shattering the courthouse bell. Then he turned and galloped out the far end of town and vanished. Just like that was that. Planned, Clara whispered. No, said Silas. That was fate. From the smoke, Harland stumbled out, bleeding from a graze on his temple. Get them, he bellowed. I want them dead. Silas pulled Clara behind a wagon, checking his revolver. We can't outrun this. Clara's eyes narrowed. We don't have to. Lifted both satchels, hers and the masked rider's. We take these papers into the church. Silas blinked. The church? There's one man in this town who hasn't sold his soul, Clara said. Father Reuben. You want to hide there? I want to speak there. Clara stood, hands raised, voice loud over the chaos. People of Dustwell, you've been lied to, bought and sold. Some townsfolk had emerged, shopkeepers, wives, even the blacksmith, all watching from doorways. This ledger, she shouted, waving the book, has proof? Names, bribes, murders your leaders sold you out? Harland screamed, shoot her, but none of the townsfolk moved. Then, a miracle. The oldest deputy in town, gray-bearded Joe with the limp, stepped forward and raised his rifle. Not at Clara, at Mallory. Put it down, Sheriff. Mallory froze. Joe, I served Dustwell for 30 years, Joe growled. Not for rats like you. More townspeople emerged. One by one, farmers, women, even the bartender. Some armed, some not, but all watching. Harlan paled. His grip tightened on his pistol, and Clara knew it was now or never. She stepped forward. "Let the people judge you," she said. "If you're so right, let them hear the truth." Silence, then Mallory fired straight at Clara, but the shot never landed. Silas stepped in its path and dropped. Clara screamed as Silas fell. His body hit the dust with a dull thud. Arms spread, eyes shut. Everything stopped. Mallory's smoking revolver trembled in his hand. He stepped in the way. That's on him. Clara dropped to her knees beside Silas, blood soaking through his vest. Her hand shook. "No, no, no. Silas, stay with me. Please." Around them silence tightened like a noose. Townsfolk watched, breathless. Even Harlan's voice faltered. "He was a criminal," the judge muttered. "A traitor." "No," said a voice. It was Father Reuben, stepping forward from the chapel doors. Bible clutched in one hand, a rifle in the other. He was the first honest soul this town had seen in a decade. Reuben knelt beside Clara. "Let me help, Clara." Held Silas's face. "He needs a doctor now." From behind, old Deputy Joe whistled loud. "Someone get Doc Hemsworth. If he refuses, drag him." Several men sprinted off. Harlan raised his pistol again. "You think this ends with one?" Man bleeding out. "I built this town. You poisoned it," Clara said, rising to her feet. "You and your kind." She raised the ledger. "This book has every secret you ever tried to bury. And now the whole town knows." Mallory aimed again. Enough of this, but before he could fire, boom, the church bell swung and slammed into the sheriff's side, knocking him flat. All heads turned. The masked rider stood at the bell rope. Mask off now. It was Ezra Monroe, Clara's father's old deputy, presumed dead 15 years ago. Clara's eyes widened. "You?" Ezra nodded. "Your father was the first man I ever believed in. And when they killed him, I swore I'd finish what he started." He tossed a bloody badge at Harlan's feet. "Consider this justice served." The judge stepped back, lips trembling. Then, like a coward, he ran. But townsfolk surrounded him. They didn't touch him. They just stood in his way, every man, woman, and child, silent, judging. Later that night, the fire had calmed. The injured tended. Silas lay in Doc Hemsworth's clinic, pale but breathing. Clara sat beside him, clutching his hand. "You saved me," she whispered. "You gave me something to live for," he whispered back. "Not just justice. You." She kissed his forehead. From outside, church bells rang again, this time for peace. Dustwell had changed, not because of a gunfight, but because someone dared to speak. Someone dared to stay. Asterisk, if this story moved you even a little. If you felt your heart race, your throat tighten, or your fists clench, then don't scroll past. Hit that like button so YouTube knows stories like this matter. Comment Justice 1 if you stayed till the end. And subscribe to Luminous Tales, because every week we bring you truths wrapped in dust, gunpowder, and heart. We don't just tell westerns. We tell what they buried